to making handmade brioche. For this recipe we're gonna need 2 bowls. First we're gonna make a starter using the smaller bowl. We're gonna add like 10 grams of instant dry yeast to our small bowl. In this case I'm going to use a digital scale because it's way more precise than using volume measurements, so I highly recommend it. We're gonna add the yeast to our mixture. Then we're going to add the sugar. The sugar is basically to give the yeast a little something to eat. This is going to help us speed up the fermentation process. I'm gonna use 10 grams only for the starter right now. That should be enough for the starter. Then we're gonna add 50 grams of all-purpose flour to our starter to make more of a thick texture. This helps to trap a lot of the bubbles and the CO2. Then we're gonna add approximately 100 grams of lukewarm water. In this case I'm using 50 degrees centigrade water, or in this case 122 Fahrenheit. We're gonna then go ahead and whisk this all, so we are going to get a even mixture with no dried lumps like floating in the mixture. We're gonna cover it with a plate or a towel or whatever we have on hand, and we're gonna reserve it. Now we're gonna make the bulk of the recipe. We're gonna make the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients without the leavening agents. We're gonna add 450 grams of all-purpose flour to our bowl. I'm gonna add the sugar. In this case I'm gonna use 50 grams of cane sugar, the regular one that we use for the starter, for a total of 60 grams in the entire recipe. Go ahead and crack 2 eggs, 2 whole eggs. I'm not a master on cracking eggs, so I like to use a different container for this, so I avoid the shells falling off on the recipe. So let's go ahead and crack those eggs. In this case I do have some shells in my mixer, so point for me. And then we're gonna add the eggs without the shells and all to the mixture with our flour and our sugar. Then we're gonna clean our area, so have a clean counter is always good. Then we're gonna add our milk. I'm gonna use 100 grams of room temperature milk, preferably, but if you don't have room temp, it will last a bit longer. The fermentation will last a bit longer, but either way it's okay. So we're gonna add then 10 grams of kosher salts, table salt, whatever salt you have on hand, and then we're gonna add our previously made starter. We're gonna see that now that has passed around 10 minutes from that we make our starter is a little bit bubbly and spongy, and that's what we want for a starter. This is gonna help a bit with the timing of the fermentation. It gives a bit of a head start to our yeast, And then what we're gonna do is mix it all together by hand in the bowl for a bit, and then when we have a cohesive mass of shaggy thing, we're gonna help ourselves with a piece of plastic. It does not have to be a spatula or whatever. Any piece of plastic will do to get it out of our fingers or counter or bowl or whatever. Now that we have mixed all the ingredients together and we have a kind of loose dough, but it kind of also stayed together, we're gonna keep mixing in the counter and make sure there's no dry clumps of flour or anything. We're gonna keep mixing. Right now we are not kneading the dough, we are keep mixing it because we are gonna build the structure later on when we add the butter. Now that we mixed all the ingredients together, we're gonna perform a slab unfolding so we have a bit of more texture to work with when we add the butter. We're gonna grab the dough by one side and we're gonna slap it in the table, and then we're gonna fold it over itself. So we grab it by one side, slap it on the table, fold it over itself, and repeat and repeat and repeat. If we need, we're gonna have a piece of plastic or whatever we have on hand to help us take all the dough out of our counter and stop sticking to everywhere. You shouldn't be it shouldn't be necessary to add more flour to the counter because it's a pretty stiff dough by now. And then we're gonna add the rest of the wet ingredients, or kind of wet ingredient. I don't know if we count the butter as a wet ingredient, but whatever. We're gonna grab around 150 grams or a stick and a half of room temp butter. In this case, I didn't grab room temperature butter. It kind of make the process a bit complicated, but in this case I live in a pretty warm area, so it doesn't make a lot of difference. But if you have access to room temperature butter, it's a lot easier. We're gonna place the butter in the middle of our dough bowl, and with the help of our fingers we're gonna make a paste that we can spread like peanut butter sandwich on top of our dough, and we're gonna start folding the dough over itself and encasing the butter. It's gonna pop out the other side and it's going to try to escape our dough in all sides, but we keep kneading the dough in folding it over itself and encasing this butter, and eventually the butter is going to integrate the dough into one. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. The butter is going to integrate in our mixture, and it's not going to be two ingredients separate. So we're gonna keep mixing this dough with the butter, and we're gonna make a mess, and we're going to smell like butter, and all our counter is gonna smell like butter and all. But at the end it makes for a pretty good bread, so I think it's worth it. We're going to clean all the mess and keep kneading to eventually have a really soft dough with the butter already integrated into it. We're gonna keep kneading the dough. It's going to last about 12 to 15 minutes from the moment we start adding the butter, plus about the mixing time is around 6 more minutes. So be in mind, it's not a really speedy process. So we're gonna keep slapping the dough, and then we're gonna make a bowl in the middle of our table. By now all the mixing, kneading and mixing ingredients and all, it's done. We have now a complete dough of brioche. and we're going to, well, I like to grease the counter with the same package of the butter. So, but if we want to rest it in a bowl or whatever, it's fine. For me, it makes no difference. And I already have the counter dirty, so why not? We're gonna cover it with a wet towel or a plastic or whatever for around an hour and a half. This is going to vary if your weather is more hotter or colder or whatever, but now that we have waited an hour and a half, we now see that the dough has doubled in size and it's all soft and spongy. We're gonna grab our molds. In this case, the dough makes for 2 loaves, so we're gonna grab 2 bowls and we're gonna grease them with spray oil. You can use butter or olive oil or whatever you want, but for me it doesn't make too much difference. So we're gonna divide the dough and we're gonna make 2 separate bowls, and then we're gonna reserve one of them and we're gonna work with one of them at a time. We're gonna divide this into 3 equal pieces, roughly equal pieces. You can weigh them so they are exactly the same, but in this case I don't feel like it is necessary. So I'm gonna make 3 balls out of dough. I like to pinch and fold all over itself into one point of the dough, so make like a rough bottom and really clean top, like with a lot of tension. We can use the table to help us make these little bowls with the top with a lot of tension from the gluten or whatever. Excuse me, my pronunciation is not that good, but whatever. We're gonna place that into a mold, a previously greased mold, and then we're gonna work into our next loaf. We're gonna divide it as the other one, 3 equal pieces, and we're gonna repeat the process. We're gonna make 3 balls out of the dough, and now we're gonna make kind of a worm with the dough. We're going to roll it, so we make these churros out of the dough. We just need to take care not to tear all the dough apart, because it will it will ruin the presentation. But we keep rolling the sticks or churros of dough to the size we want. Then we keep rolling the other pieces of dough, the other balls of dough, till we have 3 even churros of dough. And yeah, we just make sure it doesn't tear apart, or by this time, if it's sticking too much at the table, you can add a bit of not butter, flour, but not too much. It's not recommended to add a lot of flour. In this case I didn't add any flour because I didn't feel like necessary. For me it was enough the butter that stays in the counter for kneading all the dough and all. Then we're gonna place as such the 3 worms of churros of dough, and we're going to overlap them like I'm doing here, like one on top of the other. And you can do this with 4 or 5 churros, but in this case I don't know how to do them. I'm not pretty skillful at this, but it makes for a really nice presentation, so I like to do it with 3. For me that's enough. And then we find out that our dough is too long for our mold, but don't worry, we can compress it a bit so it fits into our tin. Then we're gonna place it into our tin. It's gonna be a little bit deformed, but it doesn't matter. At the end it's going to taste amazing, so whatever. And then we are finished with our shaping of the dough in our tins. In this case I'm I'm spraying it with water. You don't have to do it. You just use a wet towel. In my case, my towel wasn't wet, so I had to spray it with a little water. So that's it. We're going to let this rest for 40 minutes, 40 to 1 hour, and then or until it doubles in size. We're going to see that mine has double in size and it's taking the form of the tin. Then we're gonna make a glaze. I don't know if you call it glaze or whatever, but to make it shiny in the oven. This is totally optional. You don't have to do this right now. If you take this into the oven, will be awesome. So we're gonna make one egg with 20 to 25% of the volume of the egg in milk, and we're gonna whisk it all together so the egg is a little bit diluted with the milk, so it doesn't form like clumps in the presentation, and it burns and get all brown, like more even. And then we're gonna brush our dough with a brush, and we make sure it's all really even. Going to put our tins to a preheated 200 degrees C or 392 degree Fahrenheit oven, and voila, we have 2 loaves of really good brioche made entirely by hand. And then we are going to let this cool in a wire rack for around 10 to 20 minutes. Yes, we need to cool this down to close as we can get to room temp, because if we cut this right now, they're going to dry, and we don't want a dry bread. And then 20 minutes later, we're gonna dig in. This is a really nice and buttery and soft bread. It's awesome for sandwiches and for just eating plain or whatever you want to use brioche for. Well, that's it, guys. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. I hope you understand my accent, but if you don't, sorry. I guess I see you in another video when I make another delicious food. See y'all.